Somewhere beneath your ribcage right now, an organ roughly the size of a football is quietly making a decision most people never stop to think about. That decision determines whether the fat your body carries stays harmlessly tucked away or begins wrapping itself around your organs where it can cause real damage. That organ is your liver. And here is the part almost nobody realizes about how fat quietly behaves once it starts building up inside your body. Everyone treats visceral fat like a belly problem, something that appears in the mirror and nowhere else, but it might not even begin in the belly. Let me explain this clearly, because this single detail completely changes how you should think about fat loss and where the real battle is actually fought. Visceral fat and fatty liver share what scientists call a bidirectional relationship, which is a polite way of admitting nobody is fully sure which one causes which. It is the chicken and the egg problem, except here the stakes are your long-term metabolic health and the quiet damage building over many silent years. Does visceral fat build first and eventually spill into the liver, or does the liver get overwhelmed first and leak fat outward around your organs instead? Ask most researchers, and they lean toward the second explanation. The idea that this whole process quietly starts inside the liver before spreading anywhere else at all. It makes sense when you think about it carefully, because the liver is the command center of your metabolism and the place where all your fuel gets handled. It is where fuel gets processed, stored, and shipped out to the rest of your body. So problems with fat storage very likely begin right there. If something goes wrong with how fat is stored, it is reasonable that it goes wrong there first, quietly, long before you can see or feel it. So if you are serious about shrinking visceral fat, you are really fighting the same battle as fixing a fatty liver, two sides of one shared problem. They are two symptoms of a single problem that likely starts in the same place, and once it takes hold, it does not simply sit still. It becomes self-perpetuating over time. A liver overloaded with fat throws your hormones into disarray and quietly scrambles the signals your body depends on every single day. Adiponectin, a hormone that normally helps regulate how your body handles fat and sugar, drops lower, weakening one of your most important metabolic control signals directly. Leptin, the hormone meant to tell your brain you have stored enough energy and should burn some off, suddenly gets its important signal scrambled and confused. So the messages responsible for telling your body to stop storing and start burning go quiet, right at the exact moment when you need them most. Your body then responds by doing the opposite of what you want, storing even more fat, both around your organs and inside the liver itself. It becomes a feedback loop, and feedback loops do not quietly fix themselves in the background while you sit and hope for things to improve on their own. They need an outside push, something strong enough to interrupt the cycle before that same cycle interrupts your health, your energy, and your entire future well-being. Here is where it gets interesting, because I am not going to spend the next several minutes talking to you about protein, fat, and simple carbohydrates. You already know that calories matter. That part is not news to anyone, and it is not the piece missing from most people's understanding of this. What I want to walk you through is something most people never actually hear about: specific foods containing specific compounds that interrupt this exact cycle directly. They appear to work independent of how many calories you happen to be eating on any given day, which is what makes them genuinely worth knowing about. This is not theoretical mouse research pulled from some obscure corner of a journal that nobody ever reads or takes seriously in the real world. Almost everything you are about to hear comes from real human trials, complete with control groups, carefully measured outcomes, and proper peer review standing behind them. A couple of studies toward the end lean more mechanistic, meaning they were run in animal models rather than people, but they still point somewhere genuinely useful. Let us start with the one that genuinely surprised me the most, mostly because it is probably sitting in your kitchen right now, completely underappreciated, humble garlic. Garlic contains a class of compounds called organosulfur compounds, and the standout among them is a compound called allicin, working alongside a related compound called alliin. Allicin is the same compound responsible for that sharp smell you notice when you crush a clove, and that smell is doing far more than merely seasoning. There is a study published in the journal Diabetes, Metabolic Syndrome, and Obesity that followed just over 100 human subjects through a careful, controlled trial. Every single one of them had been previously diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease along with elevated visceral fat, so the group was clearly relevant here. Researchers split them into two groups. One group received 800 milligrams of garlic extract daily, while the other group received only a harmless, inactive placebo. The trial ran for 15 full weeks, which is long enough to see real physiological change rather than just a temporary blip that quickly fades away again. By the end, more than half of the people taking the garlic extract showed significant reductions in both their visceral fat and their fatty liver together. Here is the detail that should actually stop you cold. The researchers adjusted for body weight, for how much people ate, and for their physical activity levels. They adjusted for physical activity and total energy expenditure too. Meaning they controlled for the entire calorie side of the equation and stripped it out mathematically. And even after all that, the effect still held strong. More than half the group improved anyway, independent of how much they moved or how much they ate. That tells you something genuinely important. This is not just about calories in versus calories out. The simple equation most people assume explains everything about fat. Something inside that garlic extract was doing measurable work at a cellular level that calorie counting alone cannot explain, and honestly cannot take any credit for either. So what is actually happening inside the body? Allicin appears to function as a powerful anti-inflammatory switch working directly inside the liver tissue itself, doing real work. It suppresses a signaling pathway called NF-κB, essentially one of the body's main inflammation alarm systems that fires whenever your cells sense stress or genuine damage. Allicin also disrupts a separate pathway called JANK, which plays a direct role in how the liver decides to store fat inside its tissue in the first place. Shut down two inflammatory pathways at once, and you remove two active mechanisms driving fat accumulation in liver tissue, not merely one, which is a real advantage. There is even more to it. Researchers also noted lower AST and ALT levels in the garlic group, the same liver enzymes your doctor routinely checks. On top of that, glutathione production increased, along with the activity of a pathway called NRF2, which governs your body's internal antioxidant defense system directly and reliably. Put simply, the liver in this study was not just storing less fat, it was functioning noticeably better across the board in several measurable ways at once. There is more research still to be done, but for a compound this cheap and this accessible, the human data behind garlic is genuinely quite impressive. Which brings us to something almost everyone already drinks every single morning without thinking twice, and the results might make that daily routine feel far more productive. Coffee gets blamed for plenty of things it probably does not deserve, but when it comes to your liver, the research tells a very different story entirely, and it is not built on one small study you can easily wave away, which is what makes the coffee evidence so genuinely worth paying attention to. We are talking about two separate meta-analyses pooling together 11 individual human studies, all published in the respected journal known as the Annals of Hepatology today. What makes this body of research stand out is that it did not stop at fatty liver alone. It followed the disease further down the line. It followed the problem to the point where liver tissue actually starts scarring, a more serious and dangerous condition that doctors call fibrosis in their reports. The results split into two numbers worth remembering, and both of them matter for very different reasons depending on where you currently stand with your own liver. People who regularly drank coffee had a 23% lower risk of developing fatty liver in the first place, which is a meaningful and real protective effect. They also had a 32% lower risk of progressing to fibrosis if some liver damage was already present, which is even more important overall. That second number is the one that truly matters, because fibrosis is the stage where things stop being easily reversible the way earlier damage still can be. The mechanism seems to run through a protein called focal adhesion kinase, which normally plays a completely healthy and helpful role inside your liver tissue every day. In healthy amounts, this protein helps maintain liver tissue structure, holding cells together in much the same way scaffolding holds up a building during ongoing construction. But when it gets overexpressed, it starts forming the kind of tissue adhesions that eventually turn into fibrosis as inflammation spirals past the point of being useful. That protection likely comes thanks to antioxidants like chlorogenic acid, which seem to dial down the gene expression responsible for those structural scarring changes taking hold inside. The benefit for fatty liver itself seems to run through a slightly different mechanism, a molecule called cyclic AMP, which caffeine happens to activate directly and quickly. Think of cyclic AMP as a signal that nudges the body into a brief energy deficit at the cellular level, opening a small but genuinely useful window. That brief deficit gives the liver an opening to ramp up fatty acid oxidation, meaning it starts burning existing fat instead of continuing to store more of it. That is why increased fat breakdown so often shows up alongside caffeine intake specifically, standing as a completely separate mechanism from the antioxidant story we just discussed. So you have two mechanisms working in tandem here. Antioxidants slowing the scarring process while caffeine nudges the liver toward burning fat instead of stockpiling it away. And the amount required is not extreme at all. The data points to somewhere around 2 to 3 cups a day, not 10, and certainly not more. Not a full pot before lunch either. Just 2 to 3 cups, which sits well within what most coffee drinkers are already doing without even trying hard. Now, for something a lot of people overlook completely, and no, I do not mean the sugary juice cocktail sitting in your grocery store's beverage aisle today. I mean actual cranberries, the real fruit, or a genuine extract, not the sweetened. Watered-down version most of us grew up drinking straight out of a carton. A study published in Complementary Medicine and Therapeutics gave roughly 110 human subjects 144 milligrams of cranberry extract every single day. That was compared against a placebo group over a full 6 months, a real commitment of a trial, long enough to track meaningful metabolic change over time. By the end, insulin levels and insulin resistance had dropped dramatically in the cranberry group while staying essentially flat in the placebo group over the same period. And when researchers examined the liver itself directly, the cranberry group also showed noticeably less fat accumulation compared to the group that received only the placebo instead. Here is exactly why those two findings are so closely connected. When your cells become insulin resistant, glucose has fewer places to go, and so does fat. Your body then compensates by manufacturing brand new fat directly in and around the liver through a process the researchers call de novo lipogenesis in their published papers. That is really just a technical way of saying your liver starts building fat from scratch, simply because it has run out of anywhere else to put things. So when insulin sensitivity improves, you are not just managing blood sugar on a lab report, you are changing what your liver actually has available to work with. You are reducing the raw material your liver has to convert into new fat while making it easier for your body to burn the fat already there. Cranberries have a specific compound behind this whole effect called pterostilbene, a name that for whatever reason always makes me think of the word pterodactyl instead. Pterostilbene activates a receptor called PAR-alpha, which works almost like a switch, teaching your cells to start oxidizing fat for fuel rather than simply storing it away. It is the very same switch that flips on when you fast, when you exercise in a fasted state, or when you go deep into a ketogenic diet. Somehow, a compound sitting quietly inside an ordinary tart red berry appears to trigger that exact same cellular response inside your body without any real effort required. Add in the fact that cranberries are naturally low in carbohydrates to begin with, and you have a genuinely underrated food doing far more than most people realize. Before we go any further, I want to be completely upfront with you about something important regarding the next two findings on this particular list of foods here. The next two findings come from animal research rather than human trials, and that difference matters, though it certainly does not make the results meaningless or useless. Mechanistic studies in rodent models frequently point toward pathways that later get confirmed in people, which is exactly why careful researchers rely on them so often today. But it is genuinely worth knowing the difference as we go forward, so that nothing here ends up getting oversold or promised beyond what the evidence supports. A study published in Lipids in Health and Disease gave rats a specific form of whey protein, not the common concentrate you will find in most tubs. Instead, they used the more purified isolate form of the protein, and the results that followed were genuinely striking enough to be worth talking about here today. Rats receiving whey protein isolate showed a measurable reduction in triglyceride content within the liver, which is a meaningful and encouraging sign about how the fat was handled. This suggested the fatty acids stored inside the liver were being liberated and burned rather than left sitting untouched in storage indefinitely, exactly what you want to see. Researchers also recorded decreases in ALT and AST enzymes along with reduced lipid peroxidation, essentially the oxidative damage that happens when fat molecules break down improperly inside. Glutathione production increased as well, reinforcing that same antioxidant defense system we have already talked about twice now, a clear recurring theme you are probably noticing already. But Perhaps the most interesting finding was a measurable reduction in what the researchers described as fat infiltration moving into the liver tissue during the study period. It was almost as if the protein created a kind of blockade, physically limiting how much fat could actually move into the liver tissue in the first place. What stands out most is that this effect showed up specifically with pure whey isolate, not the far more common and cheaper concentrate found on most store shelves. It possibly works through a modest boost to metabolic rate and possibly through a favorable shift in how insulin responds to protein compared to how it responds to sugar. Protein does not spike insulin the way glucose does, and it triggers a corresponding rise in glucagon, a hormone that mobilizes stored fuel rather than locking it away. And finally, we arrive at the food that might just surprise you the most out of everything on this entire list of 5: humble, ordinary beetroot. A study published in the journal Biomolecules deliberately induced liver damage in rats, then gave those rats beetroot juice every single day for a full 28 days. What the researchers found was not merely a slowdown in the damage happening to the liver. What they actually observed was something much closer to genuine reconstruction. The physical structure of the damaged liver tissue rebuilt itself over that month, and liver function that had been compromised actually resumed working properly once again afterward. Nobody knows the exact mechanism with total certainty just yet, but there are several strong and genuinely promising candidates already sitting on the table for researchers to explore. Beetroot is rich in compounds that support nitric oxide production, which improves blood flow, and better circulation to a healing organ is never a small thing at all. Researchers also measured a reduction in lipid peroxidation, meaning there was less oxidative stress and less cellular damage overall throughout the liver during the entire study period. There was also another increase in that same UNRF2 anti-inflammatory pathway that keeps showing up again and again throughout this entire list of foods and their effects. UNRF2 essentially works like a dispatcher, calling anti-inflammatory cells to the site of damage and kicking off a genuine healing cascade inside the tissue that needs repair. But the outcome speaks clearly for itself. Damaged liver tissue, given the right input, found its way back toward normal function over the course of that study. So here is where all of this finally lands for you. 5 foods, none of them exotic, none of them expensive, and all sitting nearby right now. And every single one of them is backed by actual research rather than wellness trend guesswork of the kind you would find printed on the back of a bottle. Garlic, in a concentrated extract form, appears to meaningfully reduce both fatty liver and visceral fat by calming 2 separate inflammatory pathways inside your body at once. It strengthens the liver's own antioxidant defenses too, and it does all of this in measurable ways even after the entire calorie question has been completely accounted for. Coffee at around 2 to 3 cups a day seems to lower both the risk of fatty liver and the far more serious risk of dangerous fibrosis. And if coffee is not for you, green tea likely offers some overlapping benefit. Even though coffee's specific antioxidant profile appears uniquely effective for the liver here, cranberries, somewhere around 100 to 200 grams a day of the real unsweetened kind, seem to improve insulin sensitivity while training your cells to burn fat. And while the whey protein isolate and beetroot research still needs to make the leap from animal models to large human trials. The mechanisms line up closely. What is worth sitting with here is that none of these 5 foods actually work through the exact same biological pathway inside your body to reach their effect. Garlic hits inflammation. Coffee hits fibrosis and fat oxidation together at once. Cranberries hit insulin sensitivity. Whey protein and beetroot both point toward genuine liver repair instead. That is not a coincidence you should ignore or brush past quickly, because it points toward a smarter and more effective way to actually use these foods together. It suggests that stacking a few of these together, rather than betting everything on just one single food, is probably where the real practical advantage actually lives. None of this replaces proper medical care, and it was never meant to. That point genuinely matters more than anything else written across this entire piece today. If you already suspect you are dealing with a fatty liver or recent blood work flagged elevated liver enzymes, that is a conversation worth having with a doctor. But if you are simply looking for small, evidence-backed additions to whatever you are already doing, this is about as close to a shortcut as real science offers. A handful of ordinary, inexpensive foods, each one quietly chipping away at the same underlying problem from a slightly different angle, all sitting on a shelf near you. Sometimes the most powerful interventions are not the complicated ones at all, and they never demand much money or effort or special equipment from you to actually work. Sometimes they are simply sitting in your spice rack, your coffee pot, and your produce aisle, quietly waiting for you to finally start paying real attention to them.